bear with me. Perfect. Now, if there is anyone who doesn't want it to be recorded or anything like that, please tell me now. Right, let's start the webinar of today. So meet the editors of Digital, Geography and Society, which is a relatively new open access journal. I'm Sonia Pratt, the publisher of the Geography and Development portfolio in Elsevier, and it is a real pleasure to have you here, or have you here today. I will moderate the questions, so you can add them in the chat or you can unmute yourselves at the end to ask your questions. We have with us Sophia and Sam, who are the co-editors-in-chief of the journal. So they'll be answering your questions, but also feel free to ask questions about all sorts of publishing related issues, as well as us. I'm here to answer as well. Now, let me very briefly introduce you to our fantastic editors-in-chief. So Sam is a senior lecturer in human geographies at the University of Exeter, and he's started from the very beginning with the journal. Now he'll probably say a little bit more about himself in a minute, but let me also introduce Sophia Maalsen, who's recently been appointed, and she's very kindly agreed to be the co-editor-in-chief. Now, she was from the beginning an associate editor and now is an editor. She works at the University of Sydney School, and she's written a very interesting book. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about it at the end, Sophia. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sam now and to Sophia as well. And I'm going to mute myself.
Thanks, Sonia.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for your introduction, Sonia. That was great. It's fantastic to be able to finally say something about the journal. We launched just before COVID hit and have kind of been developing the journal throughout a global pandemic, which has been an interesting exercise. I mean, we are very grateful that, of course, as a result of digital technology, we've been able to publish, share, and promote some fantastic work in and around digital geographies. Could we have the next slide, please? So today what I want to do is give a brief introduction to myself and Sophia, who will of course introduce herself. I'm not going to do that. And then we're going to talk a bit about the journal. And I really want to cover three things, which are around why would you submit here rather than somewhere else? And related to that, we'll talk through, so what are the aims and what's the scope of this journal? I'll talk briefly about the kind of ethical standards by which we ask ourselves to be judged in relation to publication within the journal. And I suppose allied to that, moving into the third part of this brief talk, I want to talk about what might be the criteria for publication. What are the kinds of things that Sophia and I are looking for when we first receive a manuscript that is an author is asking to be considered for publication with the journal? I'm also going to kind of shine a very brief light on how your manuscript gets reviewed. What's the process via which we undertake peer review and lead into, hopefully, the publication of your article. So if we could move to the first slide, thank you very much. As Sonia very kindly introduced, my name is Sam Kinsley. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Exeter in the geography department, one of the bigger geography departments in the United Kingdom. Almost all of my research has been digital, whether it has been undertaken digitally or has been about digital things. My doctoral research was around innovation in ubiquitous computing. And since then, I have undertaken a variety of research around things like virality online. And I'm currently funded by the United Kingdom Economics and Social Research Council to undertake research on the automated processes in the European Union Settlement Scheme, which is the scheme via which the right to remain in the United Kingdom is decided or sort of regularized for holders of European Union passports in the wake of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. So there's some fascinating stuff going on there, which I hope will eventually appear within the journal. Sophia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I'll just reiterate Sam's comments about how nice it is finally to be able to get these kind of things going. We'd hoped to earlier in the journal, of course, but in the journal's history, but COVID kind of messed everything up. But anyway, here we are. So I'm Sophia Maalsen. I'm based at the School of Architecture, Design and Planning at the University of Sydney. Particularly, I'm in the urbanism discipline there. Like Sam, most of my research has been on or associated with the digital in some form. So my PhD research, which is the book that Sonia referred to before, was actually around digital sort of the impact of digital disruptions on music and sounds and what that meant in terms of ownership and also mobility of sounds. And since then, I was fortunate enough to find my way into more urban orientated digital investigations, looking at smart cities and smart homes. I say fortunate enough because there's not a lot of work in the music oriented side of things. So in some form, I'm always looking at digital geographies, and I have certain emphases on gender sort of lenses through this, and I guess the way that we interact with digital technologies in our everyday life. But I think that's about me. And I was honoured to be invited to be the associate editor on the journal when it first started with Jess McLean, who was our other original co-founding editor-in-chief, who does a lot on digital natures. So back over to you, Sam.
Thanks very much, Soph. I would just note before I kind of move on to what's on the screen now, of course, Soph and I are not alone. There is an entire editorial board of fantastic colleagues across the world who share our passion and interest for digital geographies in the many ways in which we might understand that term. We're certainly not interested in sort of policing a subdiscipline. We are very interested in interdisciplinary work. We're really interested in working with everyone out there to help develop what digital geography can mean. And with that in mind, we might ask, so why publish with digital geography in society? Well, as you can see from the 2 points that we have on the screen, we're really interested in the ways in which people undertake research and develop new forms of knowledge about the realities of our digital lives. I alluded earlier to life during the COVID pandemic. never has there been a time in which our digital lives have been, so important. There are all sorts of ways in which we might understand how the digital is imbricated in and around everything that we do. And the gamut of research that has already been published in the first 2 completed volumes and the third, which is underway, I hope illustrates some of the breadth of the work that's out there and some of the breadth of the work that we hope to champion. Of course, that work is not done ever, and we are kind of in an ongoing conversation, which we would very much like to invite anyone interested in digital geographies to join. As James Ash, Rob Kitchen, and Agnieszka Leshinsky said some time ago, there are kind of a number of ways in which we might understand how societies and spaces are wrought by, with, and through the digital. And apologies for my little cameo of my cat, if you heard that. So we're inviting you to join a conversation. We're inviting you to kind of participate in a wider set of debates and understandings and kind of further that knowledge about how we understand ourselves and our lives in relation to digital technologies, digital systems, and the various ways in which we might understand what on earth digital means. So if we could move to the next slide, please. I mentioned earlier, and Sonia and Soph have also kind of mentioned, this is not a journal that is exclusively for geographers, right? Digital geographies, as James, Rob, and Agnieszka said in their kind of position paper way back when, it's not a thing that has kind of been crafted from a particular sort of interest group of people, small interest group of people. It's a thing that it's a set of debates that have arisen organically from all sorts of different forms of work. And that work is undertaken and has been for some time, not only by people who call themselves geographers, but by people who undertake a variety of forms of research across the social sciences and humanities and all sorts of other kinds of research contexts. So we invite all of those people who might be interested to see digital geography and society as an opportunity to kind of engage in a conversation about the things that they're interested in relation to those themes. It's also worth pointing out that, of course, Digital Geography and Society is an entirely open access journal. That does mean that, as per the sort of gold system of open access, there are some publication fees, but we have a number of different waiver options. For example, for people from certain parts of the world, those fees might be in part or in total waived, depending on the criteria set out by the Research for Life program, which Elsevier have championed. I'd also like to highlight that we currently do not have fees attached to special issues. So if there is a special issue that you're interested in putting together that falls within the aims and scope of the journal, then that would have the fees waived. So there are a number of different opportunities to publish your research with Digital Geography and Society. As with anything in academic publishing at the moment, the landscape is shifting fairly rapidly. And of course, we are kind of reacting to that as best we possibly can. And if you have any concerns or any kinds of questions about that, we would be more than happy to try and answer those, whether that's as part of the conversation in this webinar or if you'd like to contact us at another time. Yes. So, as Sonia has just reminded me, we are only charging 50% at the moment for publishing in the journal as well. So there are a range of ways in which those fees are being mitigated.
And I might just jump in there too. If you're in like regions like Australia, our university sort of libraries alliances have also sort of agreements around the open access journals and fees as well. So that is an ongoing, but in terms of being associated with some sort of waive some of the fees and things like that. So there are various opportunities. So don't be, I guess, too scared of that. And the bonus of that means then that anyone who is not, cannot access your article because they're not part of an institution that subscribes to the journal doesn't have to pay to access it. And so, for example, if you do work like myself, which is often around housing policy and advocacy, it means that you can reach an audience that generally doesn't have the funding income to pay for journal access. So there's a lot of benefits on the open access side there. And increasingly, it's something that we see funding schemes expecting of their research that is funded through them to be made open access. So back to you, Sam, sorry.
No, thank you very much. Those are all very important points that are very much worth reiterating. So there are plenty of opportunities, and as Soph just highlighted, there are opportunities that maximize the potential audience of your research. So as we've just said, we are interested in interdisciplinary social science and humanities research across a range of themes and topics. You can see a kind of indicative list in the aims and scope section of the journal's website, but please don't take that to be exhaustive. If you have an idea, or if you have some research that you're writing up that you believe falls within the scope of something called digital geography, then more likely than not, we are interested, and we would be more than happy to answer any questions about that. So we have had a number of prospective authors get in touch with us and ask questions about whether their research definitely falls within scope, and we've been very happy to kind of provide some guidance around that. One thing I would like to highlight, though, is that because the journal finds itself in a conversation that is ongoing and didn't originate with either the editorial team or indeed with the journal, we're very much interested in critical perspectives on the kinds of complexities and ways in which the geographies that we might understand as being digital are kind of interconnected. So what does that criticality mean? We're interested in people publishing research that is asking questions about either the empirical or conceptual reality of what we might understand digital geography to be. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to be heavily theoretical, that it has to invoke lots of dead white Frenchmen, for example, but it does mean that we want you to be reflexive in the ways in which you are undertaking your communication about the kinds of research questions that you're posing about the world that fall within the scope of the journal. So again, to be clear, that doesn't mean that it has to be exclusively, for example, conceptually based or exclusively qualitative research, which sometimes people might associate with the kind of idea of criticality in relation to human geography, for example. We already have plenty of research which is quantitative in its methodologies, We have critical GIS research published in the journal already, and a number of other kind of ways in which people are engaging with that kind of broader conversation of what digital geography might mean and what kinds of importance it might have to wider society. So in the broadest possible sense, we would like to hear from people who are asking questions about what the underlying realities are of our digital geographies. There are always limits though, and in this case, we are really looking for papers that come from the social sciences and humanities in the broadest kind of possible sense, but it's within that kind of oeuvre that we are conducting the kind of scope of the journal. There are a number of different opportunities for publication. We, of course, accept full-length research articles between 8,000 and 9,000 words, but we also have space and scope for publishing short communications, shorter opinion pieces. We have some case studies in process that come from kind of bigger research projects that might have multi-site forms of inquiry. And whilst we haven't yet, we are more than happy to consider things like reviews of books or online forms of communication. And there is certainly scope for creative pieces. We're very interested in digitally native, for want of a better phrase, reflections, critical reflections on our experiences in digital geography and society. They may take a number of different forms, whether they're entirely screen-based or whether they're audio-visual. We certainly have scope for considering those forms of research output. We're still in the process of consulting over how that we might undertake forms of peer review there, obviously, because it is a new, I mean, they're not new forms of research communication, but it's relatively novel to be publishing those forms of critical inquiry in a largely social science driven journal. So we're working with our editorial board to think about how best to accommodate that in terms of a peer review process. And as I've alluded to on a number of occasions already, we very much welcome special issues for publication in the journal, especially with open calls. Whilst we have certainly had people come to the editorial team with an idea for a special issue that might have come from, for example, a conference session, and most of the authors already lined up, we are very much interested in people opening out that conversation more broadly and thinking about ways of posing a question in the shape of a call for papers, which might solicit a wider kind of gamut of people submitting their research and their ideas.
So, and just to jump in there as well, so for example, we have, apologies for the noise in the background, a variety of special issues at the moment. So there's one on globalizing fair work, which is around the platform and gig labour economies. We've got one around housing disruptions, which has arisen out of a couple of projects that were happening around housing, digital disruptions and provision of housing disruptions, which the researchers came together and had a workshop, and it emerged out of that. I think we also have a digital natures one in progress at the moment, and a digital children's focused one. Have I missed any, Sam? Don't think.
If you did, then so have I.
Yeah. So just to give you an idea of the kind of scope that we have. So we have all the way from children's geographies to labour sort of interpretations of geographies and housing and things like that. So if you have a group, working group of around your area of interest, it might be, we'd welcome you talking to them and seeing if you wanted to put a special issue together.
Yes, thank you very much for.
Sophie, would you like to talk a little bit about the one that we're gonna do with rural studies?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Sonia, I should have clicked on that one as well. So we also are trialing something which it's Sonia's brainchild in terms of how it works, is where we actually are partnering with another Elsevier journal, which is Rural Studies. They often get quite a lot of GIS and smart farming sort of submissions, which also fit with our journal. So we are, if this is something that you're interested in, this kind of stuff, we're looking at doing a special issue between the two journals themselves. So they'll be published, they'll either be in our stream or the Rural Geography stream, but they'll be put together as one special issue, which I think is actually quite an exciting approach to a special issue. So if you know anyone interested in that kind of area, or if that's your own, please let us know as well. I think that's the special issues.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. So hopefully you've got a flavour of the kinds of exciting possibilities for sharing your research with the widest possible audience for these kinds of interests. If we could move on to the next slide, that'd be great. Thanks very much. So, what are we looking for then as editors? What kinds of things do we want to see in a submission that comes into us via the journal? First and foremost, you need to answer the so what question pretty clearly. Is the research question and the way in which you have addressed that research question relevant to the scope of the journal? There's plenty of research out there that might pose interesting questions that are broadly digital, but does your research fall within the aims and scope of our journal? Specifically, is your research concerned with understandings of space and society? And you can take that to mean the kind of broadest possible understandings of what society and space may be understood as, but because it is a journal that has the words digital geography and society in it, then broadly speaking, at the heart of those kinds of questions that we might be posing within that conversation, space and society are pretty important. And to reiterate again then, your manuscript needs to explicitly respond to the aims and scope. If we are left as journal editors wondering how it is that this research relates to the journal and the kinds of conversations that the journal is championing, then the reviewers are likely to have some serious questions about that too. We do err on the side of caution and kind of come back to prospective authors and ask, could you clarify this? But you can make our job easier and your process more smooth by ensuring that you are explicitly responding to those aims and scope. Likewise, we really do need to see a clear rationale for how the research has been undertaken. This does not necessarily mean that you have to follow a kind of science model of publishing of a kind of introduction methods and then sort of research analysis and discussion, but we do want to see a kind of clear articulation of how you have gone about undertaking the research. If, for example, it's empirical research, what kinds of things did you do? What sorts of key decisions did you make about doing that research, and how is that shaping the ways in which you're answering your research questions? And then we kind of, as with anybody within any kind of research institution, whether that's academic or not, the ethics of research are increasingly important, and we need to have a kind of clear understanding of how your research has been undertaken ethically. So, key examples within that are, or key issues rather, within that that we need to understand are, do you have any kinds of conflicts of interest that you need to declare? And likewise, we need to be certain that you have not previously published the work that is being submitted. And then finally, as those of us who teach are no doubt very strongly aware, there are all sorts of issues around how plagiarism can function in a digital world. We do our very best to kind of address potential issues of plagiarism. We're not entirely algorithmic in that process, but nevertheless, special attention is paid to any concerning similarities between work that is submitted and others where there hasn't been appropriate attribution. So three key issues there in terms of the ethical kind of standards by which we ask ourselves to be judged and ask prospective authors to be judged. Do you have any conflicts of interests? Is this entirely original research? And has it been published anywhere else? And if you have any concerns or questions about any of those sorts of things, please do ask us. We're more than happy to discuss any kinds of concerns that you might have about these sorts of things. If you're new to academic publishing, for example, we're more than happy to kind of address any concerns that you might have about these sorts of issues. If we could move on, please. So what does it look like then when you submit to Digitography and Society? Well, we use the Elsevier system called Editorial Manager, which is an online system via which you are going to be able to submit your prospective article or manuscript. And in the first instance, what happens is I will or Soph will receive an email from the system that tells us that you have submitted, and one of us will have a look at that that manuscript. And that first kind of process of taking a look is really about answering the question, is this within the aims and scope of the journal? So those kind of first kind of criteria that I discussed a couple of slides ago. Have you written something that is clearly falls within the scope of the journal? If not, then unfortunately you're probably headed to that desk reject option. And where we have an understanding of research that might be better suited to another journal that is published by Elsevier, we will recommend that manuscript might pass on. We do try and provide feedback where we can, even if it is an unfortunate case of rejecting a manuscript. But hopefully what happens is we think, yes, this falls within the scope, and an editor will then assign or invite reviewers to undertake a blind peer review process. So we operate under a system of minimum of 2 anonymous reviewers who will undertake a form of peer review that then comes back with a recommendation that the editor then takes a decision based upon. And so hopefully that might lead to you having your research accepted for publication. But more often than not, what that leads to is recommendations for how to amend your manuscript such that it can fit and communicate your ideas in the best possible way. And then it might be referred back to you for some amendments. And then once those have been addressed, you might resubmit the manuscript to the editor, and they will take a decision again. So assuming that you successfully pass through that peer review process and one of us presses the accept button and gives it a green light, your work can get published really quickly. it'll get formatted into the sort of appropriate format for the journal, and we'll go straight into the kind of active volume that is currently building. So we operate on a 1 volume per year, much like some other geography journals like GeoForum, for example, whereby the volume kind of fills up throughout the year, and you can access research publications as and when they have been accepted for publication. So you're not waiting for the next issue. Your research is published as and when it has been signed off by you and the production team as being the best kind of possible sort of format of your manuscript. So there's a fairly quick turnaround. The corollary to this is, as with every other journal that I know of, peer review is a difficult process at the moment. Getting reviewers can be hard. And so whereas we certainly aspire to turn around reviews as fast as we possibly can, we are also interested in those reviews of being of sufficient quality. And we want you to get the best possible feedback on your research because you've put so much effort into it. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, lots of people have had their lives affected in all sorts of different kinds of ways, and people are saying no to reviewing rather more than they have done previously. And so there may be a slightly longer wait for reviews to come in, precisely because it takes us as editors longer to find those reviewers. But please rest assured that we are doing everything we possibly can to ensure that you get the best possible feedback on your research so that it is in the best possible state for publication and as swiftly as possible.
And on that as well, if there is an option when you submit to recommend reviewers, we highly encourage you to nominate around 3. We're finding that, you know, depending on who's nominated, you might have 1 accept. You might have more, but it just helps, again, trying to speed up that review. If you can give us some indicative reviewers. Thanks.
Yes, I absolutely second that. So I think I've probably spoken for long enough. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, those of you who have come to the session. Thank you to those of you who are watching later for your interest in the journal. If you have any follow-up questions, those of you who are present now, we're more than happy to attempt to answer them. If you have questions from watching this video at a later date, then please do get in touch with a member of the journal team. We'd be very happy to try and answer those for you. So thanks again.
Questions before the session, you know, on the system. So if it is okay with everyone, I'll just ask those. Thank you. The first one is what the expectations for the journal are in terms of ranking and positioning. So what do you see, or where do you see the journal going in the near future?
Oh, well, I'd like to be aspirational. As you know, we are a new journal, so it takes a while for a journal to get its up on site score and the impact factor through all those systems. What I like about this journal is that it's specifically and related to my research area, which is digital geography and society. And as such, we don't have a journal dedicated to this in the geographical sort of portfolios. I mean, we can all publish environment and planning and various other ones, but for me, the fact that they all come together in, like, there's a journal specifically for it, I think bodes well. I would like to see it, I mean, it takes a while for a journal's impact factor to be established and grow, but I would say based on the articles that we have had submitted and some of the authors that we've had submit who are very well known in the field, I would hope that it would be within the next 5 years, one of the top sort of picks for those working in digital geographies to publish in. That's my aspiration, but I don't know.
Yeah, I can only second that. I think we could get bogged down in numbers, and we certainly have kind of provided indicative ideas of ranking, the aspirations for our ranking on the website. But I think the most important thing to kind of say to any prospective author is we are trying to champion your research within the community that is most interested in that research and the conversation to which you're trying to kind of contribute. So you will give yourself the best possible chance of that research being engaged with if you submit to an open access journal that is passionate about the kinds of research that you yourself are undertaking.
We have a question here from Paul, and I'd like to answer that online. Obviously, he's with us at the moment. So since there are 3 special issues planned, does that mean that they won't all be published until 2025?
That's an interesting question. Thank you very much, Paul, and it's great to see you here. For those of you who are unaware, Paul is an incredibly important voice within the digital geographies community, at least from my perspective, and has had an enormous influence on my own research. So thank you ever so much for joining us. The special issues work in a similar way to which all of the kind of volumes function. So as and when a paper is accepted, even if it's part of a special issue, it will appear within the current volume. Then what happens is, much like virtual theme issues are addressed in journals like Geoforum, they'll be recompiled once the whole special issue has been approved, as it were. So once all the papers are in and have been accepted, and if there is an editorial attached to that special issue, or even a short introduction, that all gets packaged up and flagged as a specific special issue. But because of the nature of Digital Geography and Society as being an entirely online journal, we have that level of flexibility that digitality brings to us, right? So there is a sense in which those papers are both appearing immediately as part of a volume and then being collected as part of a special issue. So you're not waiting to see your research published at some distant future. It's there in exactly the same sort of turnaround.
Great.
I hope that answers the question.
Sure.
Thanks.
I think just to add on a little bit, in terms of timing, I can say that we're quite a fast journal for what it's worth. From submission to publication, we take more or less 9 weeks to do that. So that's our average. Of course, there are cases where there is less time that is required, and obviously cases where there is more time required for that, but that's kind of the average. So 9 weeks is pretty good. And also from the moment an article is accepted, is less than a week before it actually appears published in the journal, unless there is obviously a problem with that particular paper, which we haven't yet encountered, I don't think, but you never know. And I can't and wish to say that that is not normally the case, but you never know.
Yeah.
I have another question here. How would you welcome ideas for example, I have research in the digital, or what I consider digital, is it possible to send just an abstract or get in contact with you via email?
The short answer is yes. And Sophie and I have already done this on a number of occasions. Most recently, we were together discussing the journal last Friday, and we answered precisely this sort of question. So somebody sent in an abstract and we provided some feedback fairly quickly. So yeah, we're more than happy to answer those sorts of queries. Please do get in touch with us via email is the best way of doing that. But we are more than happy to
take on those sort of introductory sort of scoping questions via email. That's fine. And the same with special issues. If you have a special issue pitch idea and you want to run it by us first to see if that's something the journal would be interested in, please don't hesitate to contact us. And then once we've worked out whether it is or isn't something that fits with the journal, you would then just go to the submission page for either an individual article or a special issue and log it in through that. Another important thing I think to note, and we are a journal that's particularly interested in supporting ECRs. So we know, based on my own ECR experiences, we know it's not always easy. You know, some of the more traditional journals are a bit like, can be a bit intimidating to the more established ones to submit to, particularly if it's a sole authored paper, perhaps. Sometimes if you're publishing with your supervisor, it's less scary. So part of the vision that we see for Digital Geography and Society is a journal that's very supportive and welcoming to ECRs. So in those cases, we probably were more prepared, I'd say, than some of the more established journals to work with ECR authors in trying to get the paper up to publication standards, and, you know, thinking really hard around whether, say, in some cases it would be a reject or a major revision or minor things like that. So that's an important, I think, thing to consider if you're an ECR, that we are very open and put a lot of energy into supporting those submissions. Plus the ECRs are the ones who are doing generally the most interesting work because they've got the time. So that's another aim of the journal.
Yes, if in doubt, get in touch with us.
I haven't got any more questions, I'm afraid. The other ones were answered throughout the presentation, so I'm not gonna ask them.
Okay.
But I open the floor for any other questions that are online. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I have a grad student who researches digital natures. And so I'm just curious about that special issue and if, you know, how far along the process is with it and if you're still looking for papers.
It is quite far along, unfortunately. The timing is kind of out.
Yeah. Too bad.
But yeah, which is too bad. But please don't let that dissuade you from considering the journal as a possible kind of venue. It means that there is a conversation kind of ongoing within the journal around those sorts of themes. Feel free to get in touch with us. We can discuss the ins and outs of that a bit more sort of outside of this specific forum. But yeah, we'd be more than happy to kind of discuss how that could best suit them.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Well, I'm more than happy to take more papers on digital natures not associated with the special issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I would note, if there aren't any other questions, is we have been really excited to work with guest editors on potential special issues. This is not a process where we are either hands off or kind of overly controlling hands on. These are very much dialogues that we undertake as an editorial team. We're really interested in hearing from anybody out there who has an idea for opening out that conversation around digital geographies a bit more broadly, or in an avenue that we just haven't thought of. So if you think that we're missing something, let us know.
Yeah.
Get in touch with us. We are more than happy to kind of start that conversation, and it might lead to a really kind of productive avenue for you to champion a form of research that you think is currently missing from the conversation. We're very keen to work with colleagues anywhere in the world, in any kind of social science or humanities context, who wants to kind of participate in that kind of broader conversation around what digital geographies can be.
I would just, yep, I'm unmuted. I'd just like to second that. So because I think one of the real, I'd say interesting, and I'm just going to use the word cool points about this journal is that it is quite new, and that it can be very responsive to the field of digital geographies, whatever that looks like. And so it's not up to Sam and I to define what that is. So we're happy for that input. And the same, we've got a little bit of flexibility, I think, at this side too, if you want to suggest a book to review and almost have how that format is done. It doesn't have to be in the traditional, this is a book about, you might want to engage in a few dialogues around that, even have a few responses to the one book or things like that. So we're open to more interesting ways of doing things, I would say. Yeah.
I just received another question on the chat, but it wants to be anonymous. So how would you get involved in the journal? So I suppose it's not in an author's capacity, I guess is the question.
Well, funny you should say that. We are interested in expanding the editorial board at the moment. We started out with kind of building the editorial board from scratch, and obviously that kind of lent heavily on the networks of colleagues around the world that myself, Soph, and Jess McLean kind of were already in touch with. And we have had a number of colleagues come get in touch with us and ask whether they could participate in some capacity. So if you are interested, please do get in touch with either Soph or I, or Sonia, of course, and we'd be more than happy to kind of. Sorry, Soph?
I said all three of us at the same time.
Yeah, sure. And we've been more than happy to discuss that with you via email or hop on a Zoom call quickly. So yeah, if you're interested, please do get in touch with us.
Yeah, we'd love to chat. So. Excellent.
I think I'm gonna stop there unless someone is burning to ask another question. But I would like to thank everybody very much for your time and your presence, for those who are here, but also for watching it or taking the time to watch it later on. Sam, Sophie, anything else to remark?
No, beyond saying again, thank you for your interest in the journal, whether you have turned up on the day or are watching this at another time. If you are in any doubt whatsoever about how you can fit with this journal, please get in touch with us. We are more than happy to answer your questions. We are more than happy to provide forms of feedback, especially if you're in your early stages of your career, but obviously we welcome people from any kind of background in that regard. But please do get in touch.
Yep.
And spread the word.
Spread the word, yes. I'll just second Sam on that. Thank you for coming. Look, I think digital geography and society has ample opportunity to become a really exciting space for digital geographical research. And we'd really want to hear from anyone who shares that enthusiasm for digital geography. So thank you. Spread the word, as Sam said. We look forward to receiving submissions.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to stop recording now.